Welcome to our online video series, Reading Hope in Trying Times. Our guest today is Niki Hardy. Niki is a Brit in the U.S., a rectal cancer survivor, pastor's wife, tea drinker, and teller of bad jokes. As a speaker and the author of Breathe Again, How to Live Well When Life Falls Apart, she's all about meeting us where life's not fair and embracing the reality that with God, life doesn't have to be pain-free to be full. You can learn more about Niki at nikihardy.com. Welcome, Niki.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So, Niki, I know in your case, life hasn't always been easy. Can you tell us more about that and how you end up writing your book?
Yeah, sure. So, yes, I lost my mum to cancer. She had small cell aggressive lung cancer. And if you know anything about cancer, that's, a pretty brutal one. And then 6 years later, I lost my sister, Jo, to cancer. And hers was the same as mum's, aggressive lung cancer. And they both survived about 14 months. And just 6 weeks later, so I'm still reeling from the grief of losing Jo, who was just 43, I was diagnosed. And mine wasn't lung cancer like theirs. Mine, Brian, was rectal cancer. And, I was just reeling. And I never set out to write a book when, I was diagnosed. I wasn't a writer. I'm not one of these people who would say, well, I've always read so much and I've always journaled. But what I found was that as I shared about my story, as I shared the funny and ridiculously funny things that happen when you have my kind of cancer, and I just kept sharing and sharing the practical stuff, as well as the spiritual stuff, as well as encouragement for other people. So many people resonated with it. And I came to realize that there was a real need for people who are going through hard times, not necessarily cancer, but any kind of hard times where life had fallen apart and it had either unraveled in an instant or gradually over time. And they had got into this survival mode. I was determined to survive cancer, but ultimately that's all I was doing. I was just surviving a life I hadn't signed up for. And so what came out of that was the desire to not just survive, but to thrive and to help other people do it. So really that's the story behind Breathe Again and this kind of mantra of life doesn't have to be pain-free to be full.
So that kind of cancer, usually people don't talk about a lot. And you've chosen to actually bring humor to the situation. So can you tell us about, your feelings on that and how that relates to where we're at today with the coronavirus?
Yeah, so I decided to not just say cancer and not just say colorectal cancer, but to go all in. Now, I didn't do that from the get-go. We did start saying at the beginning that I had colon cancer, and then it kind of became colorectal cancer. And what I realized is that, as Brene Brown says, we're all wired for story. And, God wired us to be seen. And when we're in the depths of our story, whether that's abuse or a divorce or, trouble with teenagers, whatever it might be, when we don't see anyone around us with our similar stories, we don't feel that people understand, we don't feel seen, and we don't feel heard. And then we start to make up the end of the story. And so I was kind of like, well, I'll go first and I'll share my story, and I'll share the hard bits, the funny bits, the encouraging bits, the bits where I was at my lowest, and, share how God moved in that and bring humor to it. So I didn't want to write a book that was deep and heavy and super, super spiritual. I want it to be like we were sitting down over a cup of tea together. And so now, with all that's going on in the world with Corona, I think being able to say, actually, I'm struggling with this. I'm an extrovert. I don't like social isolation. I'm finding it hard. Or, we've got 2 college-age kids and a high schooler, and they haven't come home yet. School has closed residential housing, but they are choosing to stay in other housing and stuff in order to take their classes online. And I'm scared for them. And, we run a church, and how can we help the most vulnerable within our church? And so it's like, by going first, I think we allow others in to say, me too, I feel that. And they feel seen and they feel heard and able to ask for help and stuff.
So you've kind of adopted a mantra of, life not having to be pain-free to be full. So what was the story behind adopting that?
Yeah, it came about in such a great way. So like I said, I was determined to survive. I'm a Brit. We can keep calm and carry on with the best of them. And like I said, I found that all I was doing was surviving in the end. And I'd kind of got into survival mode. I had had chemo and radiation. I'd had surgery. I had an ostomy bag, and where I could walk, talk, poop, and praise God in church all at the same time. And then I had more chemo. And in this kind of survival mode, I eventually found an online cancer community. I actually talk in the book about how I kind of shunned the cancer community at the beginning, but that's for a whole other host of reasons we can talk about if you want to. But when I did find them, I met people in there who called themselves cancer thrivers, not just survivors. And I was like, ooh, I want what you've got. I want that. It was as if they were saying, I know life is hard right now. I know it stinks, but I'm jolly well going to grab the most out of it and grab all that life has for me right here, right now, in the present. And it was just so hope-filled and alive. And so I wanted that. And I thought, well, how do I go about getting it? And I also thought from what Jesus said, he said, I have come that you might have life, and life in all its fullness, life in abundance. And he also said we'd have storms. And I think what I'd done in my head was said, well, I'm in a storm right now, so the abundance must be waiting off in the future somewhere, when and if this is done. And then when I met these people, I just thought, I just don't think that's true. I don't think God said that he would mean, I've come that you might have life in all its fullness, but not yet, or not in this part of your life. So I set about trying to figure out how, life doesn't have to be pain-free to be full, that it can be full and hard at the same time. In the middle of the pain, we can find peace. In the middle of loneliness, we can find comfort. And that's kind of what I found, that bizarrely, and I hadn't noticed this before, that we can hold these different emotions in the palm of our hand at the same time. And so, yeah, life doesn't have to be pain-free to be full has kind of become my mantra.
So your book shares 7 practices to help people really grab hold of life, even through trying circumstances. So how did you come about those?
Yeah, so when I decided I wanted to thrive and not just survive, and I wanted to help other people do that too, I had moved my Caring Bridge posts, that's a website where you can update friends and family on how you're doing. I had moved them to a blog because somebody had said, don't stop writing, you should write a blog. And you'll laugh, but I said, what's a blog? I think I was the only person in 2014 who didn't know what a blog was. And so I moved them over, and I thought, how can I help people? And so I asked, about 20 friends who had gone through or were going through really hard times. There were people with cancer, people who were amputees, people with chronic pain, all sorts of different things, abuse, divorce, loss. And I said, how do you find the abundant life right in the middle of what you're going through? And they sent me all their tips, and they really fell into these 7 areas that are: choose brave, trust God, find community, be vulnerable, embrace the journey, practice gratitude, and reach out. And so that's how the kind of the structure for the book came about as well. It centers around these 7 tools. And at the beginning, We deal with some of the rubbish we believe when life falls apart. And it's been so interesting thinking about how this all applies to us now in the midst of the coronavirus and the fears that we're feeling and the isolation, because I start by talking about these lies that we believe about ourselves and about God. And one of those is personalization, this belief it's all my fault. Now, we might not believe that corona's our fault, but if we have an aging relative in another city and we can't go and see them, like my father is in London and I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina, and my stepfather is in Vancouver, Canada, and they're both elderly. My dad's over 80, my stepfather turns 90, and I can't get to them. And so there's this feeling of, well, it's my fault. I should have spoken to them sooner. I should have done all this. So that's some of the rubbish we believe about ourselves. And then just looking at these tools and saying, well, actually, they all still apply to my life today, whether they apply to, struggling to conceive, or whether they apply to the coronavirus. They're all still super relevant. We need to make brave choices, and whether that brave choice is staying at home and not seeing somebody that we love, and trusting God because he's got great credentials, and finding community. We need to find different ways of finding community right now, and being vulnerable with our stories, with each other and with God, and really sharing how difficult we're finding it, and embracing the journey, not waiting for this to be over, but God has more in the middle, right where we are. And then being grateful. And this was a big one for me, because I learned that we don't have to see things differently to be grateful, rather be grateful to see things differently. And so practicing gratitude has become a huge thing for me in terms of seeing the good, and then I feel different, as opposed to waiting until I feel different to see the good. And then reaching out, when I had cancer and my life had fallen apart, I didn't feel like I could be the glue in somebody else's life. But actually, when we reach out, these small acts of kindness fill us up way more than we could imagine. And, small acts of kindness now, reaching out to a neighbor saying, I'm going to the grocery store, or texting a friend, or, reaching out to somebody who is in the high risk zone, somebody who's immunosuppressed or is over 60 or 70. These small things can fill us up and bring us joy in the most amazing ways. So it's been so great to see how the message of breathe again is just so relevant now, and is helping us all breathe again when we feel like we're suffocating with this thing.
So your book is very practical, and you provide many different questions and exercises and prayers that readers can use. Yeah. So how did that come about?
Yeah, well, Brian, I'm not a huge reader, and what I found when I was in the depths of my cancer was that people would give me devotions, or people would give me memoirs of these people who were so inspiring and had had such amazing journeys of hope through suffering. And I knew that they had so much to teach me. But I was like, I know I need to trust God, but I don't know how right now, because I'm angry at him, or I know I need to find community and be with other people, but like, what does that look like for me right now? And so I really wanted to help people not just know that they had to do it, but figure out how step by step they can do it, and walk them through the process of each of these. And like I said, it's a super down-to-earth book that's kind of, I like to think of it as part spiritual coach, part best friend, part somebody sitting down and having a cup of tea with you and just saying, come on, we can do this together. And that's why it's a super practical book that's got the chapters, and then the questions, and then prayers at the end of each chapter. And again, the prayers, I decided to just write them as I would say them. So very raw, very normal language, not super spiritual, anything like that. Prayers that people would actually pray without flowery language. And then in the book, I've put a ton of different resources and gifts to help people, put into practice all this stuff as well. So I wanted it to really be a hands-on guide, like a roadmap.
So if you could say one thing to someone who right now is really struggling, whether it's with the coronavirus or, other aspects of their life, what would you say?
I think I'd say, don't wait. Don't wait for this to be over to find more of what God has for you. He hasn't left you. He hasn't forgotten you. He's not angry at you. He's not trying to teach you something that you're just too stupid to figure out. He's got more for you right now. He loves you and he sees you. And so anyone who is in the midst of something difficult and in the middle of Corona, let's not wait till it's over to find all that God has for us, because he's got so much good stuff for us. Yeah.
So several of the folks in our audience are writers or aspiring writers.
Yeah.
And what advice do you have to them, as they attempt to get their writing out into the world?
Yeah, that's a great question, because like I said, I didn't set out to be a writer. But I think I would say, look, if I can do it, you can do it. Because here's a girl who got a C in English and quit English at 16. You can do that in the UK. I did nothing but math, chemistry, and biology from 11th and 12th grade up. So, I mean, I hadn't written more than, an email, a thank you note, or a text, or a science paper since I was about 16. So if I can do it, you can do it. And I think the key is figuring out who our audience is, what they're struggling with, what their pain is, and their problem, and how we can solve it. And whether that's in a memoir, or whether that's even in fiction, or a practical nonfiction book like mine, really knowing our audience is what helps. And I've heard a lot of people say that often our audience is us a few years ago. So what were you feeling? That kind of thing. But if I can do it, guys, anyone can do it. Keep going.
So in addition to your book, on your website, you've got a lot of free resources to help people too. And I mentioned before that's NikiHardy.com, but tell us a little bit more about what's there.
Yeah, so you can get a couple of free chapters. This is the book, Breathe Again. So you can grab a couple of free chapters there if you want. There is also an audio that's called How to Handle Anything Life Throws at You, which seems pretty appropriate right now. So they can grab that. And like I said, it's an audio, which is a little bit different. You can listen to it while you walk the dog. And there's also a set of promises there about whose you are and those kind of things, all on a nice printable with that mantra, life doesn't have to be pain-free to be full. There's a little ebook about hearing God's voice. There's all sorts of things there. So I'd love it if people were able to, come over and grab what they need.
Well, that sounds really wonderful that you've done all that. And I know people will appreciate those resources. So, Niki, thank you so much. This has really been helpful and certainly very timely in terms of what's been going on these days with the coronavirus. I also want to say that Niki is going to be one of the speakers at the Charlotte Writing for Your Life conference, which was originally supposed to be taking place basically as we speak, but will be rescheduled till the fall. So if you want to meet Niki in person, then please join us there in Charlotte. And finally, stay tuned to both Niki and Writing for Your Life social media, because we're going to do a giveaway of one of her books. So Niki, thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. It's been great to be here. Thank you.
Yes, thanks so much for joining us, and look forward to working with you further.
Yeah, great.